All right, welcome to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome to this Q&A. Um, so something came up wasn't really a question, more like I would say more like an observation, right? And that is that someone tells me, a person became religious, they have kids and whatever, many kids, say many grandkids, and um their siblings, not religious, whatever. And the person tells me that the parents see a lot more honor, a lot more respect from the one that's religious than the other kids or the grandkids. Yeah, they don't hear from too much from the other kids or the other grandkids. For whatever different reason, it doesn't it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter, but they see a difference. Right now, there are times someone, let's say doesn't grow up religious, becomes religious, and the family thinks, it's weird, it's strange. We're talking about Jews coming back to Judaism, right? They think it's weird, it's strange. Why would you choose this? All kinds of different things. But they see like, the relationship between the parents and the kids, and if they have grandkids, whatever. Now, they won't always admit there's a difference, right? At least publicly. Now, or to that child. Now, why not? Because then they have to say, like, how they did things. They did things differently. Okay, right? And a lot of times, they're going to do things the way they think it's right, or circumstances demand it, or whatever the case is. And maybe not the right thing. But, kids could have claims against the parents. You did this, you did that. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm not even talking about physical abuse or emotional abuse. But whatever they've claimed, kids will have claims against parents. You should have done this, you should have done that, right? They could have claims. They could have claims against the parents. Parents aren't, not infallible. It doesn't mean parents can make mistakes. They can make mistakes. They for sure can make mistakes. They make serious mistakes. But it can have a negative effect, on the kid for sure, right? A person, parent to child, is going to be, 90% things that they say that should be positive, 10%, you have maybe 10% leeway of negative, but, negativity. But if it's the case where parents always nitpicking on a child, that child's going to feel it, right? That child, 100%, is going to feel it. They'll resent it. They're, picked on, let's say, for no reason, or just parents get angry easily, or whatever the case is. So yeah, later down, or earlier, doesn't really matter. But later on, what's the person going to say? They may have to go to therapy. They may see like they weren't treated right. The question is why, right? The question is why, and how it happened, how these things happen, how they manifest themselves. Or when a person got punished or yelled at or whatever, what were the circumstances? I don't always remember, things get kind of fuzzy. Maybe the older you get, depending on the person's memory, but it could be that A, they're not seeing the whole picture. It could be, right? I mean, I'm not saying, let's say, a parent, didn't do anything wrong. They for sure could have done something wrong. Right? I'm not saying not necessarily something so egregious, but whatever it is. And again, parents perfect? No, definitely not. Do kids know how to press buttons on the parents? Yes. Yeah, they certainly do. But, when they get older, they get older, they start having their own kids. They see it. Maybe, you know what? Maybe the parents weren't so bad. Maybe they see things a little bit different way. Some people would say, I would never raise my kids the way they did. Okay, right? So, they don't like the way they were raised. They'll raise them a different way. But, a lot of times, I don't know what the percentage is, but a lot of times, even though people say that, And they're going to say, I'm going to do things very differently. Unfortunately, we can repeat the same bad mistakes, right? So, what's the percentage of kids that, when they become adults and they have kids to a totally different way of parenting than the parents? I don't know. Maybe it's a higher percentage. Maybe it's a much higher percentage. But, if we don't pay attention, we could end up doing the same thing our parents did. Yeah. In other words, negative things, not positive things, right? Negative things. We could repeat it. Why? Because that's what we saw, right? That's how we grew up. That's what we saw. Yeah, and that can be passed down, unfortunately, generation to generation. Well, yeah, my parents did that. This is how they did things, right? And then their parents may say, well, this is what we did, but that's what our parents did. So, like, I'm not gonna say everything. Certainly not. Certainly not everything. You can take the good. If there's any good from what parents did, etc. But at the same time, there can be a lot of animosity. It can be a lot of aggravation. For how a person was raised and what they went through. But the question is what it was. How it affected a person, and it's a legitimate claim, right? I'm not saying it's not. Very well could be a legitimate claim. There are stories where, kids were walking on eggshells and, let's say for argument's sake, parent had certain mental health issues. And it's only later the kids realize, as they get older, that it wasn't necessarily something they did, right? If they did something, let's say the reaction comes out, in a severe way or a harsh way, or in a way that doesn't meet what the person did, what the kid did. Yeah, in general. So what happens? Person will think it's their fault. If they would only act this way, the parent would act, responsibly the other way or whatever. Yeah, but they think it's their fault. Now, some things could be their fault. Not, we're not gonna throw the parent totally under the bus. Could be their fault, okay, but they have an obligation to react in the right way. Right? Now, not all the times we act in the right way. Now there are repercussions. There are repercussions. Scar a kid. Scar a kid for life. 1 outburst, 2 outbursts, 10 outbursts. Mm-hmm. Right? Again, depending why it's done. Yeah. Anger is a terrible thing. There's no question. But at the end of the day, a person, to get help with this, let's say, they went through hardship when they're younger. Now, it could be the way they're seeing things, but not exactly the way it happened. Now, it could very well be, right? Exactly what they're saying. Yeah, parent was at fault. Okay, right? Now, we want to give the parent the benefit of the doubt, why they might have done such a thing, right? Or a person needs to process their feelings and what they felt. Now, it could be that's not what the parent meant, but that's what they did, right? That's that's how they acted, right? Why? Because it's like they read any parenting books. I don't think so, right? I mean, even though Dr. Spock back in the day was was popular, people read his books or whatever. How many people today in general like going to read any books about parenting? If they have kids to educate, they have younger kids or whatever. I don't know. I didn't take a survey, but I wouldn't think it's that common. People are gonna wing it. Maybe they'll get advice from other people. How'd you handle this? Or how'd you handle that? Or, depending how severe it is, maybe, they'll get opinions from, professionals, what to do. But at the end of the day, a person can see clearly the difference between a religious upbringing and not. Now, they may not admit it. They may not want to admit it, right? But there's a very clear difference. So a friend of mine says, is his parents say, we hear from your kids, their grandkids. Call them all the time. They're in touch with them. They respect them, so to speak. And, the siblings they don't hear from. Their other grandkids they don't hear from. Now, again, a person can make the claim, it's a false claim. But a person can make the claim and say, well, grandma does this, or grandpa does that, or, okay. Yeah, we all have our idiosyncrasies, right? In general, nobody's certainly perfect by any stretch, but again, parent's a parent. A parent's a parent. That's it, right? So we're not talking about abuse per se, or even psychological abuse, right? In general, it's okay. The older a person gets, the less they want to change, and they won't change, right? Because they're stuck in their ways. Okay, within reason, right? But there's an obligation, certainly from the Torah, honoring parents. Again, we're not talking about in a case where they're evil and there's abuse, right? So it's a whole different case. There's no obligation over here. Certainly not. Person could do it, halavai, but it's it's not held against them if they don't, right? An obligation, according to the Torah, right? Honoring parents means parent walks in the room at least once a day. It's an obligation for a child to stand up for them. Even if the parent says, no, you don't have to. Obligation for a child to stand up for them. Just showing respect. Showing respect. You don't sit in their chair unless they allow. You don't contradict them. Can't embarrass them. I mean, there are laws governing this. It's a very hard mitzvah to do. We've mentioned before, Rabbi Yochanan said he was glad he didn't have parents because, there's no way he felt on himself, how was he going to honor his parents the way they need to be, right? His mother died basically in childbirth. Right after childbirth, his father died before he was born. So he didn't have parents. Right? But that's what he said on himself. So you could say, well, if he said it 2,000 years ago, or more, it's a very, very hard mitzvah to do, and he's glad he didn't have parents, was going to say about us. Yeah, but there's a difference here. What's the difference? The difference is, from a very young age, a child is educated in the way to honor parents and to respect parents. They're obligated, 100%. School's going to teach them. Parents are going to teach them. They certainly should. Certain things, a kid talks back to a parent, you got to discipline them. Yeah, not allowed to talk back, not allowed to be disrespectful, right, so to speak. Yeah, again, even if a child is angry. Yeah, even if a child gets angry, okay. Certain things you don't say. Even if you throw in a tantrum and this and that, okay. You can say, but they lose control. Yeah, but they have to be educated. Not allowed to say that. Not allowed to talk that way. Etc. I would say even in the secular world, I would think, there are basic things, even by non-Jews, be obligated, maybe not the same way in honor, and respect, but there's basic behavior. Basic behavior. And just because a child is a teenager, which a friend of mine would say is like a different creation altogether, doesn't give them the right to have a parent. Does not give them the right. It's disrespectful, right? Or, let's say, you're walking somewhere and, a child or a grandchild or, a child of the parent, says like, come on, like, get moving. Like, why walking so slow? That's disrespectful. Even if they are walking slow, even if it's like, they laugh, I was like, yeah, I walk slow, I'm old, I'm older, whatever, but that is disrespectful. Now, sometimes people will say, well, that's funny. It's funny, like, come on, grandma, let's move. Like, why walking so slow? Think about it, someone in their 80s or in their 70s, let's say, whatever, they can't walk. They can't walk so fast. They got a problem with their legs, whatever it is. That's not flattering, right? They don't feel good if you tell them that. They can joke about it. Absolutely, they can joke about it. And they can laugh about it, but inside, I don't think they're laughing. Yeah. And even if they are, even if they make a good laugh out of it, okay. Yeah. Is that respectful? It's not respectful. It's not respectful. So religious kids are going to be educated totally different. They're going to be educated in a way where this is a very, important mitzvah to do. Yeah, to honor and respect parents. Now, it's not an easy mitzvah to do. It's certainly not an easy mitzvah to do. Well, the secular world, to, honor parents. Again, I'm not talking where parents are abusive or anything else. Yeah, the proper speech. So, it goes out the window. Now, what's the reason? What's the reason? Because they're never taught it. It's not a value, right? If you grew up in a religious household, right, you've gone to school for years and years, right, this is a no-brainer. This is more than a no-brainer, right? This is how religious kids are born and bred, yeah, to honor and respect parents. That's, a huge mitzvah to do. Is it easy? No, right? It's not an easy mitzvah, but who gives you the right? Speak back to them. Yes, even if they blaspheme, yeah. Either who says Torah is true and this and that, or a person says, well, I think, the Torah says like this, or I think it says like that. Yeah, you're not telling them directly they're wrong. There's a big difference. They'll figure out the message that you're telling them they're wrong, but it's a nice way of doing it. You don't have to say, no, you're wrong. Come on, don't be an idiot. Like, they're going to say. But they're blaspheming. They have to be put in their place. Okay. So that may be true. But they give you a way to tell them off. Right? So it doesn't give you that right. Even in-laws, right? You got to be careful. Or outlaws, maybe as they're called. Right? Got to be careful with that also. They raised, your spouse. So, not always easy, get along with them. And if you get along with them, that's great. Right? It doesn't always go that way, but also have that respect. Also have that respect. Yeah, the Gemara brings down also that, somebody over the age of 70, because of all the travesties and different things they've gone through, trials and tribulations, they've gone through in life, someone over 70, even a non-Jew, stand up for them. They walk in a room, you stand up for them. Again, you can tell me why they deserve respect. They don't know Torah, let's say, they're not going in that path. Doesn't matter, right? It's a very strong opinion to say because of all the trials and tribulations they've gone through, and they're still, in one piece, whatever. The mitzvah to respect them, the mitzvah to honor them. Yeah, anybody non-Jew, even they're idol worship. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe you say, well, an idol worshiper, you don't have to show respect. Could be. Right? But this friend of mine said that, the parents who aren't religious and pretty far, let's say, they see the difference. They know the difference. Now, whether they admit it, they won't admit the child, usually. Right? Because, again, they're going to see themselves and say, well, I didn't do this. I didn't educate this way, or I didn't do it that way, or whatever. But what are they going to see? They see the difference. Now, the thing is, which is somewhat of a frustrating thing, the thing is, they will say, they're not going to acknowledge, it's going to be very hard for them to acknowledge that the way these kids are, or grandkids, or whatever, and the way they treat them, they're not going to acknowledge it comes from Torah. Because again, then they're going to see the flaws and the lack in themselves. Okay. But there are times they will see that. They will absolutely, I don't think there's any question. I don't think there's any question whatsoever. They'll see they're different. Now, they may not admit for the right reason why they're different. Okay. But you got to be blind not to see the difference. And it's a major difference. How they speak, how they act, how they take care of their kids. Yeah. It's a very big difference. Very, very big difference. Now, the only thing is, they may not acknowledge from where the right place is, where it comes from. Yeah, and that's kind of frustrating, but but they see the difference. But they see the difference. Now, based on that, they could say, second person can say, well, you got lucky. Because there's no guarantee with kids. You can send them to the best schools, certainly the best schools, the best yeshivas and whatever. It doesn't come out the way you want. Not only that, they may veer off the rails. They may, they may go off the beaten track for a lot of different reasons, right? Doesn't really matter, but for a lot of different reasons, they may go off the beaten track. Okay, but it's true. There are no guarantees. You can educate your kids the best way. You can have generation after generation, rabbis, this and that. Doesn't matter. Kids going to turn out how they're going to turn out, right? Everyone's got their own, their own trials and tribulations, right? But someone's going to say, well, you got lucky. So that's partially true, right? A little bit, right? I'll give a little bit of that credit. And the reason is because there's no guarantee, right? What are the only two guarantees in life we have? Death and taxes, right? Not in that order. Yeah, those are the guarantees in life. Because the person came from an illustrious family, does that mean their kid's going to turn out the same way? You would think there's a lot of things going for them. A lot of family close together, let's say. Everyone around them is religious. That's a different issue. It's a very, very different issue. It's a greater chance of success. If everyone's going, in their own direction, like off the rails in their own direction, doing different things or whatever, what are the chances? Very slim, right? Very, very slim over here. But the way they're educated is huge. It's absolutely huge. It's a major difference. Now again, does that make everyone perfect? No. But there are boundaries, right? There are limits. What a person can say, and how they should say it, right? One of the things a child should be punished for, cursing's one of them. If they curse, it's definitely, I would say it's definitely one of them. But I mean, talking back and showing disrespect, that you don't tolerate. That 100% you don't tolerate, because even if they think they're right, they don't have the right to say it. They don't have the right to say it in that way. They can disagree. They can disagree. They can have a different opinion, and I think this, or I think that. Okay. They can have a discussion. Probably should have a discussion. But even if you have a discussion, there's a way to say things. And when a person, doesn't show respect, right? You can rub it in their face and like, listen, there's a mitzvah aseh deraisa, there's a Torah command, to honor parents. Yeah, but you have to show respect. Now, certain things, you don't have to honor or respect them, right? We said, if they're evil, whatever, but if they tell you to do something that goes against the Torah, it's a mitzvah not to listen to them, right? They'll say, well, we want you to come, this place on Shabbos. Well, I can't, right? It's Shabbos. You have a mitzvah to honor me. Well, that's true. Yeah. But the bigger mitzvah is to say no. It's to say I'm not allowed to, right? Torah's forbidden. It's you make up your own Torah. Not true. There's a mitzvah to honor parents, but not when they tell you to go against Torah. Yeah, that's a different issue. That's a totally different issue, right? So if they're evil, like really evil, so honoring you may not have to do. You don't have to honor them. Respect. They have a certain level of respect. I mean, you can't curse them out. You can't embarrass them. Certainly can't embarrass them in public. Right? So there's a fine line here. But a parent deserves to be talked in a proper manner. You can't just tell them off. Even if you think you're right. Even if they blaspheme. Even if they blaspheme this on fire code. Can't tell them off. You can disagree. You can bring them sources. They can say, I don't care. They can, and, it doesn't really matter, and blah, blah, blah. Very good. They could do that. But you still have to be respectful. Yeah, even if you disagree. right? Even if you disagree. Now, that being said, you're not agreeing with them. You're certainly not agreeing with them. But what you are doing is you're showing respect in how you're speaking to them while being very much against what they say. So that's not disrespectful. Disagreeing is not disrespectful. Yeah. Now again, if they're gonna say something, you say, well, I think, so you don't tell them directly. Well, if you tell them, I think in the Bible, in the Torah, the Old Testament, whatever you want to call it says like this. Now they're gonna understand if it says that and it disagrees with them, they're wrong. Right? But you're not telling them outright, hey, stupid, you're wrong. You're not telling them that directly. So that's okay. Right? Well, what do they say? I don't care what God says, I don't care what the Bible says, and I'll rip up a Bible and this and that. Okay. I give you a right to raise your voice and scream at them? Right? Now, again, what can happen? Tensions rise. People, may say things they shouldn't say, but you got to be in control. You can be fastidious and hold on to God as much as you want and say, oh, this is desecration of God's name and this and that. Okay, but there are limits to what you can say and how you should say it. Giving a parent lip is a problem. It's a serious problem. Yeah, it shows disrespect. Even they blaspheme. That's how far it goes. Because they're not allowed to say whatever they want. Yeah, but at the same time, even in trying to prove that they're wrong and this and that, and things can get to a point where, it gets somewhat high pitched, voices. And once the parents start screaming, it doesn't give you the right to scream back. Say, well, if they can scream, why can't I scream? Well, two wrongs don't make a right. Yeah, you always got to be in control. And sometimes, again, things get emotional and different things. And, but what can also happen, just on this topic, what can also happen is, a child, again, depends what happens. It depends what happens. But in general, a child can say years later, oh, you did this, that, and the other thing when I was a kid. Or, I was turned off by, this, that, and the other thing. Okay. But the effect that it has later, you can have, a person can say, which is wrong, even if they did certain things that you disagreed with. Still have an obligation to be in contact with them. Yeah. You still have an obligation. Again, if it's toxic and it's problematic, better not to be. Okay. You still have an obligation. You absolutely have an obligation. And sometimes it's going to be harder than others. Okay. But again, if it's toxic, like someone once asked me, is would you tell kids not to speak to parents? I said, depends. Right? It depends how bad it is. Yeah, if it's toxic, nothing good comes out of it, and you're always getting fights and different things happen, then I would say no. If a person realizes this could happen, whatever, they're willing to do it anyway to have a connection, okay. But I would limit it. I would say it should be limited. Right? But, parents, should not have to, no matter how busy a person is, no matter how busy a person is, parents should not have to wait for the child to call them. Meaning, a parent should not have to be calling the kids to see how things are. I understand kids are busy, this and that. Like once a week, maybe twice a week. You take 2 minutes, 5 minutes, you call, you send a text, how are things going, whatever. Be in contact. The parent should have to run after the child. Should not have to run after the child. Now you say, wow, who's the bigger person? We're not talking about a child over here. We're not talking about, 10-year-old or a 15-year-old. Yeah. Talking about their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, doesn't matter. No matter how old they are. They should have enough brains to know that a parent gets older and, they should be in contact. Even a little bit. The parent shouldn't have to run after the child. Again, the child could say, I don't want to talk to the parent. I'll talk to them once every 2 weeks. Yeah, the conversation goes nowhere. We don't have anything in common anymore, blah, blah, blah. Right? But a parent wants to hear from the child. Right? What parent doesn't want to hear from the child? They want to hear from their child. Yeah, how are things going? How is this? And if they have kids, whatever. Usually that is the case. Usually. Right? Usually that's the case. But for a parent to have to run after a child, because the child's too busy, or even better, child doesn't care. Child doesn't care. Parents brought them into this world for better, for worse. So the very least, they have an obligation to respect them and honor them. Again, I'm not talking about abuse or anything else. They have an obligation from the Torah to honor them because they brought you in this world. Someone's going to tell me, but they're evil and it's toxic. Okay, different issue. Very, very different issue. I'm not talking about that. Right? I'm not talking about that. What's a normal case? Normal case. They brought you in this world. Racism's not bad. But let's say you have less in common. Okay. Maybe you have less in common. Maybe you have less in common. Maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case. You have less things in common. Okay. Or a child gets, a child thinks, parents did this, did that. I'll call them what I call them. That's disrespectful. Parent wants to hear from their child, normally. Normally they want to hear. Normally they want to hear. Yeah. It should never come to that. Should never come to that. Why? Because it causes the parent pain. What? I have to pick up the phone and call you, see if you're alive? Yeah. We could go by, you don't pick up the phone? Yeah. Some people will speak to parents on a regular basis, on a daily basis, every other day, something like that. Again, a person can be really busy. Okay. He can be really busy. Yeah. I would think every couple of days, they should be in contact. Just in general. That should be the norm. I'm not going to say every day. I mean, people are busy. They have their own lives. Okay. But a parent shouldn't have to worry where their kid is or what they're doing if they haven't heard from them. Now, again, what could the kid say? Well, we talk about the same thing. Well, it's never interesting. Well, I got to talk to them on their level. Okay. That means you're stuck up. That means that the fact that they brought you in this world, they clothed you, they fed you, they sent you to school, they helped you in this and that. At the very least, that's your obligation. That is your obligation, 100% according to the Torah. Nothing to talk about. Nothing to talk about. Yeah, but they did this and did that. Okay, then people have claims. Then they're going to say, they did this when I was there. They did that. So I'll call them when I call them. That's disrespectful. Unless, those conversations go nowhere. And, and it's just a lot of yelling and screaming and it's toxic. So that's a different issue. Right? That would be a different issue. But if that's not the case, if that is not the case, there should be contact. Every so often, a parent should not have to run after a kid to call them. They should not have to run after a kid to call them. I don't speak about things that, you say, that's obvious. Some people, it's not so obvious. Some people will say, well, they did this or they said that, many years before, so I'll call them when I call them. Because they don't discuss the issue or it's not going to go anywhere or whatever. Okay. So fake it. Go fake it. Yeah. Speak to them on their level. You'll say, I don't want to. I don't like superficiality, this and that. This doesn't interest me. Okay. Doesn't interest you. Everything, you speak about interest to other people. It's like, well, I'm busy. Okay. I'm busy, with my own life doing this, that, and the other thing. Okay. So who cares what you do? So what? So what if what they do in their lives doesn't interest you? Who cares? Right? You have a connection. You should have a connection. Now, if you've gone in a totally different direction, that's harder. 100%, that's harder. That's no question. But you're going to have some sort of connection. And even if they're never going to, and this is the hard part, even if they're never going to acknowledge what you do and this and that, yeah. So that main part of your life you can't talk about. Okay, they won't talk about it because they it's painful. They don't acknowledge it. Okay, that's part of the process. That is part of the process. But at the end of the day, should you expect that? Some would say, well, I want them to take an interest in their life. Right? Someone tells me a parent said they went to or whatever, they went to a synagogue and, like a luncheon there. So they went, I gave a donation and, the rabbi gives a class or whatever. So the person says, well, that didn't really interest me. It's not my way of thinking, right? Or the topic, let's say. The topic, okay, I heard it, very nice. Right? Doesn't affect my life. Like, Torah doesn't affect my life at all. Yeah. But they went to this thing. Fine. Yeah. What does that tell you? It tells you if they're your parent, you ain't talking about Torah to them. They're not going to be interested. Yeah. They have no interest. It's totally foreign to them. Totally foreign to them. Right? Okay. So even though that's a part of your life, you'd love to share the things with them, but you can't. You have to find other things. Right? You find other things. And a person has kids or whatever, that's easier. You speak about them. You speak about, I don't know, everyday things you could care less about. Okay. But that's the only thing you talk about with them. What are you supposed to do? Yeah. They should be more inclusive in my life. They don't care what you do. They don't have any interest at all. A person's a lawyer. Say, you think I'll be interested in all your cases, what you're working on? Maybe some will be. Maybe some will be. What if they could care less? What if they could care less? You say, but that's part of my life. That's a big part of my life. Great. Speak about something else. Find something else to speak about. They don't care. It's not on their worldview. Yeah, it's not on their worldview. But it's a big part of your life. Move on. You speak about the weather. I don't know. Speak about sports. I don't know. Find something else. The person say, but I don't like to be superficial and I don't like these conversations. Okay. Well, then what else are you going to talk about? What else are you going to talk about? You speak to them on their level, whether you like it or not. Because they're not going to come to your level. Most likely. Or there are topics they just don't care about. Even the secular. They don't care as long as, a person's making money, whatever. So, okay, so you want to do this. This person wants to do that. Okay, but it doesn't interest them. It doesn't interest them. Okay. Again, the conversations don't have to be long. They certainly don't have to be long. Right? And even if they'll never show interest, imagine doing, let's say the parent or siblings are narcissist. Like, you got to realize it's all about them. Life revolves around them. Whatever you do doesn't really matter. Well, it's kind of hard to have a conversation with somebody like that. Right? I'm not going to say impossible. It's very hard. Very, very hard to do. Right? So if that's the way the person is, you have to deal with them on their level. If you don't deal with them on their level, you won't speak to them. You have no connection because you say it's all, On the other hand, they'll say, well, what about my life? What about, I'm busy. I'm doing this. I've been busy. You didn't take 5 minutes to pick up the phone. Everybody's busy. Everybody can use that as an excuse. Yeah, could be valid also. So what? So what? You have one parent in the world. Two parents in the world. That's it. That's all you have. Yeah, once they're gone, they're gone. And for some people, say, good, I'm glad they're gone. Okay. Right? But in the end, they are who they are. They brought you into this world. That's it. Right? So here somebody asks, okay, let me get the questions here now. Someone asks, what do Shomer Nagia, people that do not touch others of the opposite sex? Yeah, unless it is a spouse or a child or a grandchild or a parent. Right? Not including aunts, uncles, cousins. That you're not allowed to teach. You're not allowed to touch, right? Right? Someone from the opposite sex. So what do you do? What do you do in formal and official settings? So one way to do it is that, if someone puts out their hand, you say, well, I don't want to embarrass them. Let's say it's a fish handshake, right? So even if it's a fish handshake, which means it's not an intimate handshake whatsoever. It's certainly not a hug. So what do you do? Right? So what do you do? So one way to do it, they stick out their hand and say, I only shake hands with, if it's a guy, a person can say, just to kind of break the ice a little bit, they can say, well, I only shake hands with ugly women. That might break the ice a little bit, right? But you make clear, say, I'd love to shake your hand. I'm sorry, because of religious reasons, I can't, right? Or, right, you can explain it outright before you even do anything, or you can acknowledge them, right? This can work also. They shake out their hand. You put your hands behind your back and you bow, kind of like the Japanese do a little bit, right? You're not obviously bowing to them on the floor, right? But you acknowledge them. You acknowledge them. Now, by doing that, by not saying anything, they're probably going to get offended. All right, they're probably going to get offended. So you bow to them, say, "Oh, it's such a pleasure to meet you. I'd love to shake your hand, but religious reasons I can't." Now, what happens if they come up and give you a hug? So, okay, like nothing to do. You can't give them a hug back, right? But like, what if you're stuck in that situation? What if I was stuck in that situation once? With a relative, much, much older, and I took a few steps back. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, they got embarrassed. They got embarrassed. Like, this person was like 70 years old, 75 years old at the time. Yeah. But what can I do? Sorry, I'd love to give you a hug, but whatever, it was very awkward. Right? It was very awkward. And, I heard, I always say, if you're going to say something in someone's face, say it. If you're going to say it under your breath and you hear them, that's bad. So this person says, oh, come on, this person's 75 years old, so old. Like, what? You can't give him a hug? Like, you can't give him a hug? They'll say it under their breath, but I'm not deaf. At least not yet. Yeah. So, if you're going to say it, say it to their face. Now, some people won't be embarrassed to say it to their face. Okay. Yeah. If you're going to say it under your breath, you better make sure no one hears you. Right? Or the person you're saying about, doesn't hear you. Now, you're going to say, but you're not allowed to embarrass someone. Now, some may say, okay, in that case, not to embarrass them, what do you do? What do you do? Some will say, so you don't hug back. Yeah, not an intimate hug, right? Kind of like a fish handshake, right? There's no intimacy there. Even the person's old, doesn't matter. Someone say in that situation, you can do that. Now, others say in that situation, you can't do that. It's still forbidden, right? It's 100% forbidden, even if it's not, done in an intimate way. Still going to be forbidden, 100% forbidden. Yeah, and that's what a person should do. Not do it, right? Person's going to be embarrassed. They don't know, right? Let's just say for argument's sake, they don't know the protocol. They don't know Orthodox protocol, right? Now, if it's somebody where, a colleague, this person started a job, so you make clear. Yeah, all people of the opposite sex. No offense, I can't hug you, I can't kiss you, I can't shake your hand, it's religious. You have to set the boundary straight away. Now, what if you can't? What if it's a random person? What if it's a random person? Yeah. So again, either, you say straight away, I love to shake your hand, but, I can't for religious reasons, and they may ask you why, and you have to tell them, right? That's one way around it, right? You stick your hands behind your back if they do it, and you bow. That's another, you show respect, you show honor, you're acknowledging them, and then you explain why you can't do it, right? But again, the question comes up, but you can't do that. What if that's going to embarrass them? Even if they don't know, it doesn't matter, right? Even if they do get embarrassed, okay. Yeah, there's no way around it, right? There is no way around it. So you're not going to be penalized if they got embarrassed. You try and make light of it. First will say, I always shake hands with ugly men. Like there are ways, to make statements to break the ice a little bit. They have to explain, like, I'd love to give you a handshake, fist bump, this, that, but I can't, right? My religious beliefs go against that, and I can't do that. It's no offense, right? No, they may think it's weird, may 100% think it's weird. Yeah, okay. And what if they're taking it back, they get embarrassed? That's not your fault. We don't say, well, do something forbidden so you don't embarrass someone. We don't say that. Yeah, this is forbidden. So if it's forbidden, it's forbidden. Neither case. Right? Neither case. That's what I would answer. That's what I would answer to that. Does honoring one's parents extend to caring for and providing for one's siblings who are unable to do so for themselves? Yes. For a parent, yeah. For a parent, if they can't take care of themselves, let's say, or they need help and you have money. Yeah, you have to help them. If they can't help themselves, you have to help them. What if you don't have money? What if a person doesn't have money and they can't help them physically, but they need help? So you have to work it out, right? A child would have an obligation to borrow money, right, to help the parent. That's how far it goes, right? To clothe them, to feed them, take care of them. I know a number of cases like this that kids are involved in that because the parents can't help themselves. A parent is sick, let's say, right? I know a number of people. Parents are sick, and part of their money that they earn goes to helping them. That's a huge thing. That's an obligation, not an option. It's an obligation if you're able, if you have the money to do it. If you don't have the money to do it, then the halacha is you should borrow money to do it. That's how far the obligation goes, right? So if they can't help themselves, you have to help them. You have an obligation to help them. Now, what if it's going to throw a person off, and that's what you have to do, right? There are no options over here. I know a number of people that whatever, they take off time from work. Parents were sick and this and that, and they didn't have a choice. They lost money. Okay, but they had to take care of them. They were able to take care of them, right? It's not an easy thing, but again, person have to use their own money. If they don't have money, they have to borrow. They have to find money to do it, right? It's a pretty strong obligation. Yeah. Now that is for parents. Now, when let's say a person has a sibling, and they need help. Does the person have to use their own money? No. It's only by a parent. If a person has money, they can help, then they should. Right? It's not the same obligation as a parent. A parent's a much stricter thing. Much, much stricter thing. Right? Does the person have to borrow money to help a sibling if no one else can help? They should, if they could. If they can help, they should. Yeah. Is it the same obligation as a parent? No. Definitely not. But they should help if they can. Yeah. And if they can't help, let's say monetarily, they should try and find people that could. Or try and find organizations that can help. If they themselves can't do it. Family comes first, no question about it. No question about it. Now, someone will ask, what if they are idolaters? And what if, quote unquote, they're evil in other ways? Like things that go against the Torah. That doesn't matter. You should help them anyway. If you can help them, you should. Yeah. Just because they're idolaters, because well, why should I help them? They're still going to pray to their God and this and that or whatever. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Blood is blood in general. Should help them. We should help them. As much as possible. Again, if a person has that money, you don't have to go borrow money. Right? That would be the difference. The person wanted to, and they wanted to go, certainly beyond the letter of the law to help, they could. Right? Again, is it an obligation? No, it's not an obligation. By a parent, it would be an obligation. Definitely an obligation. Someone asked, am I Chabad? No, not Chabad, but I have nothing against Chabad. So, just your average Haredi Orthodox Jew. Somebody asked, hope that answered the question. The hugger inevitably will linger on you. That could be. That very well could be. But at the end of the day, they get the message. They should get the message, but they'll think it's weird. 100% they'll think it's weird. But not much, you can break the ice, you can joke about it, this and that, but like, you know, in the end, they'll probably think it's weird either way. Developmental stages of education. Ooh. What stage should we be stringent a child saying a blessing properly? Well, the age of 3. When they start learning how to talk, what's the first thing you teach them? Torah tziva lanu Moshe. Right? God commands the Torah, pass it down. Pass it down to Moshe. When they're able to speak, you try and train them in blessings. Right? They're not going to be able to say the whole blessing, but, you try and train them, in blessings even by the age of 3. Even by the age of 3. The average age of education is about 5 or 6. Right? Educating them in blessings, educating them in mitzvahs, those type of things. By the age of 5 or 6, that's the age of education. But even before that, you can already start, when they start to talk. You can start educating them in, trying to say Shema Yisrael, or whatever small things, not major things. They don't have to know what it means. It doesn't matter, right? You're training them, right? So even by the age of 3, they can talk. But the average age of education by a child, boy or girl, doesn't matter. It's about 5 or 6. It's about 5 or 6. When is the focus just exposure and positive association? When they're much younger. When they're much younger than that. But even as they get older, they want to associate things with positive. If a parent has to, punish a child, punishment obviously should fit the crime 100%, right? But again, within reason. Within reason. A child growing up needs a lot of positive reinforcement. We live in a cream puff generation. One of the single biggest problems is kids do not have self-esteem. People do not have I just heard a whole thing about this. Now, whatever, someone major expert on this topic, and deal with family issues and other types of things. They were saying that it's the biggest problem today. The biggest problem. They're talking about religious kids. Yeah, it's a huge issue. Yeah, that kids don't have self-esteem. But we have to build it. It has to be a lot of positive. Most things have to be positive. It's like 90-10. 90% positive and God forbid, negative. 10% if it's or 80-20, 90-10, whatever it is. The more negative things the person says about a kid, or whatever is going to demolish them. It's going to demolish them, right? So you have to have a lot more positive things than negative things to say. It's easy to find negative things to say. If a person's a negative person, very easy to nitpick. Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? You can do it in a nice, friendly way. You have to educate them. And you might have to say the same thing over and over again. Okay, they may get annoyed by it, but try the best, try the best of your ability. But you want the interaction, the general interaction, to be positive. That's what you want. Yeah, the vast majority has to be positive. It's not positive, and the kids feel like they're nitpicked, or they feel like, sometimes if you disagree with them, you have to hear them out. You have to hear what they have to say. Right? You can't just say, "Oh, your opinion doesn't matter," blah blah blah, knock them down. Kids can get knocked down very easily, very very easily, right? Even a person that has a lot of positive reinforcement, one like sharp negative thing, you take all that positive reinforcement and flush it. Right? A person got to be very very careful because again, this generation is very weak, very very weak. And it happens. Maybe a child's in a bad mood, this and that. So you ask them, you need a certain thing or whatever. You're going on a trip, okay. So you want certain snacks, okay. So tell me what you want. Give me a list of things. I'll go. I'm on my way going to the store, so I'll pick them up. All right, they're busy doing other things, so don't forget it. I just offered. I'll do it. Just give me a list. No, okay. Yeah. Not a very positive, interaction, but you made the effort. You asked, and whatever, they turned the nose up. Okay. Right, but it could have turned, you could turn it into a whole big thing. Why are you answering that way? I'm here to help you. Why, whatever. They can be in a bad mood. They could, being interested in something else, but, and they don't want. Okay. So what do? You move on, right? But again, the interaction should try and be as best as possible. They should be positive. The vast majority should be positive. Not so easy. It's not so easy. Kids annoy us sometimes. Sometimes. My daughters had a baby girl, first girl after three boys. Like, oh, so cute, this and that. Yeah, she'll grow up. Don't worry. You got a lot to you got a lot to expect. So you know, so I saw her yesterday. So I told her bigger, her bigger brothers. I'm like, that's not a soccer ball, right? You know that kid's not a football, right? They're like, that was my baby sister. Smack. I'm like, no, you can't smack her. She got toughened up pretty quick. Yeah, but at the end of the day, whatever, person has kids, person has a hard day and a long day, and they're blabbering away. All you want is peace and quiet. They're like, you gotta listen to them. You gotta hear what they went through. You have to also feel out and say, if there are any issues and whatever. But sometimes you're busy doing other things, but you gotta stop. You gotta stop. You gotta listen. And you gotta let them talk. Right? You gotta let them talk. And you have to interact. 100%, you have to interact. But the point is that the interaction should be positive. 100% should be positive. That was first question. Second question is, what approaches do you recommend when a child is resisting a particular mitzvah or minhag? Let's say like we're going to keep or sitzes that is appropriate for their age. I know somebody actually. I thought this kind of strange. Like the kid wears like this. I don't know. Wears a certain type of hat. It's already I don't know, 4 or 5 maybe. They should already be wearing the yarmulke kippah already. But I don't know. They don't like the texture. They don't like how it feels. It's like, or it always falls off. I think that was a bigger problem. Is that like, it falls off a lot. So instead they wear this hat. It looks kind of funny because everyone else around them, all these kids are wearing the same thing or similar type yarmulke. This kid sticks out. Okay. Well, that's the reason he sticks out because, even clips don't help and I don't know, Velcro doesn't help. I don't know. I told someone just staple it to his head. So, well, I can't do that. So, one of my good ideas out the window. But if they are velvet stays on the head, yeah. Again, if it's bigger, it's more like a soup bowl, so that'll work better, for sure. Sometimes, kids get not fibromyalgia, but it's I don't know, they don't want, some kids have sensory issues. My grandchild like had whatever, they had to work on it. Had certain sensory issues. They don't like the way it sits on their head. Yeah. Even if it's like a soup bowl, whatever, they don't like the texture, they don't like the feeling. So you gotta find, you gotta try and find something that is not gonna, make sensory buttons go off. But so what uh you can so what do you do if they don't want to? If they don't want to. So, you can make a sticker chart, you can bribe them, every time, they wear a keeper for a certain amount of time, whatever, they get a sticker. They have so many stickers, they go, you can go to the store and get something or whatever, prizes, something like that. That works with it works with a lot of different things. Briberies are always good, right? Because eventually, once they start doing it, they get used to doing it. They don't have to bribe anymore, right? That's one way. That's definitely one way. I would say, or make it fun for them. You make it fun for them. Also, how would we balance coercion, encouragement, and understanding? It's hard. It's very hard. I would say that even if a person has a long day, and they come home and the kids are all over them and like they just they want to eat something, they want to relax, and they have to go out the door, they have to go pray or other things. You got to come. Sometimes on easy things. Sometimes you might have to wait 5 minutes before you walk in the door in order to have your thoughts around you, even if you had a hard day, like just try and shake it off and, whatever, because, they don't have to be a sacrifice. They don't have to be a sacrifice. Even if you had a hard day, what does that have to do with your kids? But it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing because the person may be, just that's what they do. They just do it by habit, whether, again, it's probably not right, and probably they get affected by it, right? You got to find a balance. You definitely have to find a balance. But there's one thing, a parent, especially mothers, because they, take care of younger kids a lot more than the fathers do. One thing they need 100% is a lot of patience, a lot of patience, and a lot of times if they're not rested, and they're tired, they overreact. Also, and and finding a balance also is that a person has to do things for themselves. Yeah, the kids are asleep, or you got some free time, person wants to exercise, they want to read, like whatever, a few times a week, whatever, a parent should definitely do things. Certainly a woman, little kids should do things for themselves. If sometimes you can't, sometimes, it's very, very hard. But if you don't cut out the time to do it, a person's so busy, especially, if you have little kids, it's hard. It's hard. But you have to try and find, some level, of a balance. Encouragement that is the name of the game, right? In building them up, even if they do something small and really something, insignificant. You got to make a big deal. You got to make a big deal about it, even if they don't do it on a regular basis. Like, wow, you want to take something, from the table? That's so great. What a big helper. Like, even if they don't do a lot, they do a lot. They want to feel like, they're helping out. So that will encourage them. Now, some kids, maybe if you encourage them, they don't want to do it. Okay. But sometimes, you know, sometimes you have to say, listen, like everyone has to help. Everyone has a job, right? There's a remember, what's one of the hardest jobs, cleaning for Passover is the kitchen. That's always the hardest job, right? Because there's so many things to do, and you have to overturn the kitchen and take all the non-Passover stuff out, bring in the Passover stuff. I mean, it's a mess. It's a huge mess for a couple of days. I remember one Passover that everyone had jobs. Everyone had their jobs. And I thought we made pretty clear that, we can clear the kitchen, all hands on deck. Everyone has to be there. Yeah. So one year, two of my older kids say, it's not on the job. We worked hard enough. We're not doing it. They left. I'm like, where are you going? Everyone has to help. Everyone has to help. Yeah. And they're like, it's not on the list. Right. So it's like kind of like, using the way the Gemara thinks. Wow, it's not on the list. I don't really have to do it. Right. So whatever, back and forth. They left. But we had to turn over the kitchen. We had to turn over the kitchen. Yeah. So we turned over the kitchen. Tried to get them back. They wouldn't come back, whatever. Eventually they came back and they decided to help. Well, that was like a number of hours later. Right. But the other day, it had to get done. So, they went on strike, insubordination. Okay. Couldn't force them. I mean, tried, didn't help. Right? Eventually they came back and eventually they helped. Okay. Right. So, one year we're trying to make it fun, a lot more fun. Some people, if they can afford it, they'll work like a dog for like a number of days, make sure everything's done and they'll go away for a day or two or whatever, or go on a trip or something. Right? Different ways. Different ways to do it. Encouragement is very important, but it has to be positive encouragement. Right? Negative encouragement will absolutely destroy a kid, especially if the negativity is much more than positive reinforcement. Then the kid will say, my mother, my father, they hate me. Yeah, all they do is they pick on me. They never see the good. They never see the good. That's that. A kid will say that. A kid will absolutely say that. Yeah. That's sad. Right? That's sad. But if the kid is saying that, that means the parents are doing something wrong. right? Again, we're our own worst enemy, but that shows the parents doing something wrong. So the more negativity, the worse it is. Now, again, coercion can be done with prizes. Coercion can be done with bribery, right? Same thing, right? Yeah, sticker chart, other things, but they need a lot of positive reinforcement. So I told the great rabbi once, he was saying that the biggest problem, and he was saying this like 25 years ago, the biggest problem today is what do you call it? Self-esteem, low self-esteem. So he said you got to build them up, and you have to be more positive things than negative things, and blah blah blah. So I said, yeah, if you keep building them up, they're going to be big bolly guys, but they're going to be conceited. Tell them how great they are and how great they can be, and how happy this and that. Don't worry, I can deal with that also, but that's not the problem. That's not the problem. A much more serious problem, right? And that's a lack of self-esteem. So you gotta build them up. You gotta encourage them. You definitely have to encourage them. Again, bribery is good. Encourage them to do things. A chart is very good, right? I would say, right? And understanding over here means you have to listen to what they say, right? They come home, they're in school. It's a long day. It's only a long day for them, right? In general, but you have to hear what they say and what they don't say, right? They have to be intuitive also, and then you see sometimes, they want to go to school, they throw a fit about going to school. So you have to get to the problem, like what's going on and what the issue is. But I would say the most important thing out of anything else besides, obviously, positive reinforcement, the most important thing is listening, right? Just let them talk and they'll talk. They will talk, right? They'll say plenty of things, right? So you have to listen to them, you know, and that's when a person likes to turn off the phone, unless it's like something really important you have to answer. But, when a kid comes, you can hear what they have to say or what they don't say, and how is their day and whatever, and the other most important thing is they come home, they're gonna be hungry. So like, you have to have food for them. You should have food prepared. If not, you prepare it, whatever. The last thing you need is like a kid blabbering away and he's starving, right? So, you want to make sure you take care of that also. But you got to listen to them. That's extremely important. You have to, just let them talk. Because the more they talk and the more you listen, the more they'll want to talk to you. The more when problems come up, they'll be open. Now, some kids are less open. Okay. Some kids are more closed. Some kids are more introvert. Okay. Right? So you can have a mixture, right? But if you have a kid that's open, and they feel comfortable coming to you, then anything that happens, good or bad, you'll hear about it. Even when they're older, you'll hear about it, right? So that's very good because you have open communication, right? And there should be open communication. But what if the kid's more introverted, this and that, so that's harder, right? That is harder. Someone here says, I've seen people would spend thousands on healthcare for a dog and watch the family member suffer, right? It's a sad thing, right? It's a sad thing. It's like someone said, you can't teach a person how to care. Like, you can't. If they don't have it inside them and they're stuck up about themselves and other things, maybe their own family, like, okay, maybe they're very different, with their spouse and their kids. Okay. But if a person doesn't want to have a relationship with you and there's whatever reason, yeah, you can't force the person, even if they're older, you can't force a person to care. You can't. Let's say you're radically different from them, even though you can talk about other things on their level. Yeah? But they don't care. If they don't care, what can you do? We say you can bring the horse to the trough, but you can't force the horse to drink. How do you change a person's mentality to get them to care? If they've never cared in their entire life, game over. Right? That's not on you. You can't train a person to do that. Right? And, you can try to have a relationship. They don't want to have a relationship. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? Well, it's terrible. Yes, it is. It's terrible for a parent to see siblings like that. Yes, it is. Well, what are you supposed to do? There's nothing to do. right? So you're right. A person may care about their dog more than a family member. Or yeah, that is true. That 100% is true, right? And here someone says very good, they can't give what they don't have, right? Right. So if a parent is not a vessel to be able to educate properly, let's say, and they don't know what they're doing and they do this, that, and the other thing, and the kid suffers. Okay, the kid suffers 100%. And the kid could have absolute claims 10 years later, 20 years later, 40 years later. You did this, you did that, the other thing. But if the person's not capable, right? And this is played to me, when I was much younger. I'm not going to say too little, too late, but I understood, right? It made a lot of sense. If they're not capable and they have an IQ of a 20, they have an IQ of 25, you cannot expect someone with an IQ in education and other things, if they have an IQ of 25, you cannot expect anything from them. Anything from them in that case. You can't make claims 20 years later, 30 years later, say, oh, you were this, that, and the other thing. They weren't a vessel. They were never a vessel for nothing. So how can you expect? How can you have expectations on someone who's retarded? I know you can't say that on YouTube, right? They're mentally challenged. You have to see them like they're mentally challenged. If you don't see them like they're mentally challenged, you have a lot of problems. A lot of problems. You won't be able to deal with it because person said this, person said that. They did other things, spoken about this a lot. They did all kinds of other things. You're right. And if someone mentally challenged does something to you, and they push you, and they shouldn't do it, but they come up, give you a big hug and this and that, and slap you on the back. Okay, yeah, you get annoyed by it, but you look at the person with Down syndrome. What do you think? What are you thinking? Yeah, that's it. You got to look at these people like they're mentally challenged, right? That, again, what someone was telling me 30, 40 years before, the damage is already done. Okay. So there are ways to deal with it, certainly different types of therapy, but part of the way to deal with it after the fact, many years later, that you see that the parent was definitely a wacko in different ways. Yeah, like they have a 25 IQ, that takes some of this thing away. Not all of it. I wish it would take all of it away. It doesn't. Right? You need other types of therapy to deal with it, probably. Right? But it can take a major chunk of this thing away. Because you see them for who they are. Right? You have to deal with them on their level. But you can't come back 20 years later, 30 years later, oh, you did this, that, and the other thing when they were mentally challenged. Now a person will hammer me for saying that because they're gonna say, but they caused so much damage. Okay. You're right. Caused a lot of damage. A lot of damage. So a person will need serious therapy for that. But when they're going through it and they see it wasn't their fault. Doesn't matter if they took a sledgehammer and bashed you over the head all the time. And told, Bill Cosby won't, use Bill Cosby as an example, right? Still alive. I think he's in jail, but whatever, he's still alive, right? And he's in a comedy routine. I don't know if it's true or not. Probably a little bit of truth in everything. He thought, one of his routines, he would say, I thought my name was JC because that's all my parents called me. They screamed at me. They kept saying his name, so I thought that was my name. Yeah, but again, a parent treats a child like a piece of dirt. It's going to have a negative effect on the child for sure, right? Child may never recover from it, even when they're adults. I mean, they'll need therapy probably, but maybe a lot of therapy. But if a person knows they didn't really do that much wrong to deserve that, okay. Again, the damage has probably been done, okay, right? But from a Torah perspective, with everything, get over it. Because they understand the parents, something wrong with them. There is something seriously wrong with them. Yeah. So you have a sibling, a parent, whatever, that shows they never cared, ever, ever. Isn't that painful? It's painful. 100% is painful. But if they've been that way for so long and they're not going to change, right? People, some people say, well, you got to be the bigger person. Why do I have to be the bigger person? Why do I have to be the bigger person? This person doesn't care. They've never cared in their life. If they never cared and they're stuck up in their own life, doesn't matter when they were a teenager or older or whatever, and they have this personality disorder, yeah? They have this serious personality disorder. What are you supposed to do? What in the world are you supposed to do? You're going to call the person up all the time and say, hi, how are you? What's new? You can have a good conversation. But deep down, they don't care. They'll never reciprocate. You know why they'll never reciprocate? They'll tell you X, Y, or Z. That's the reason. But you know why? That's not the reason. You know why they won't reciprocate? Because they don't care. They don't care. Now, is that painful? Yes, painful. It's extremely painful. Even if it's extremely painful, this person's not a vessel to be able to care in this way. Maybe for his spouse, they care. Maybe for the children, they care. Okay. In this case, they don't care. So how are you going to force them to care? You can't. There's no possible way to do it. There's no possible way. Right? So then someone maybe will make you feel guilty and say, but you got to be the bigger person. Screw you. What do you mean I have to be the bigger person? Who said you have to be the bigger person? They don't care. They don't give a rat's tail either way. So what are you supposed to do? That's not your fault. You can't bring the person to drink. Or the horse, let's say better. You can't bring the horse to drink. So what are you supposed to do? Until you move on. It's painful, but you got to move on. You got to move on. Right? And that's what someone here says, sums it up very well. You can't give what they don't have. If they don't have it, they don't have it. That's it. Can't teach it to them. That's who they are. That's their personality. So you can talk about it. You can mention it. It's going to go. Or if it doesn't go over their head, what's it going to do? They can admit you're right. They can admit you're 100% right. Now, that's a huge thing. That's a step in the right direction, but that doesn't mean you're going to get what you want. Right? Because even if they say you're right, what does that mean? That means they know they have an issue. Very good. Okay, now you can try and pin them down. Very good. What's going to be in the future? How are you going to do this in the future? How are you going to fix this in the future? Say, I don't know. Yeah, think about it. I have to work on it. This, that. Now, so what happens? In that case, they admit it. Very good. Right? That's a good stepping stone. But you know what? Days later, weeks later, months later, didn't change. They were good words, though, but they didn't change. But what does that mean? Either it's very hard for them to change, they don't want to change, or even better, they don't care to change. Now, if they don't care to change, there's nothing to do. Right? You can't force someone to like you, even if they're related to you. Even if they're siblings, you can't force them. So if they don't like you, what are you supposed to do? They don't want to have a relationship. Now, they can blame it on other things, but the other things are not necessarily the core of the issue. It's part of the issue. Right? It could be part of the issue. Right? Let's say it's 30% of the issue. They make it as 100% of the issue. Yeah? But it's 30%. It's even less than that, let's say. 80, 90, 95% of the issue is they don't care. That's the issue. There's nothing else that's the issue. The other things are just like smokescreen. To say, oh, see, this person doesn't care about this, or they don't care about that, or they never did, or blah, 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 and they're offended. Okay, good point. But is that really the crux of the issue? It's part of the issue. Small part of the issue. But it's part of the issue. Very good. It's part of the issue. Granted. Is that the whole issue? They'll make it out as the whole issue. Right? They will make it out as the whole issue, but it's not the whole issue. It's not even close to the whole issue. It's a fraction of what the issue is. It complicates the issue. Yes. 100% it complicates the issue. But what does it do, though? What does it do? It's a smokescreen. Because the real issue is the person doesn't care. That's the real issue. And if they don't care, you can't force them to care. Right? It's a painful thing. I'm not going to say it's not a painful thing. It's a painful thing. But you can't force them. So you'll decide if you want to speak to them or not speak to them. Right, the ball's in your court. Right? You can be the bigger person. Right? 100% you can be the bigger person. Do you want to be the bigger person? They don't care, so why bother? Right? Now, someone would pin me down and say, they say, I still want to have a relationship with this person. So I said, okay, so call them. Call them every once in a blue moon. You want to have that relationship. Fine. Realize they'll never be reciprocated. And realize deep down they really don't care either way. But if you still want to have that relationship, it's your choice. You have to be the bigger person. Malaki. Right? Hogwash. Forget it. You don't have to be the bigger person. They don't care. What are you gonna do? Beg them? You gonna get on your hands and knees? Please have a relationship with me? When you know deep down they don't care? I don't have to do that. Nobody should have to do that. Yeah, you move on. That's what you do. You move on from life. You move on. It's sad. I would agree. It's very sad. Yeah. Do you have any choice? You don't have a choice. Right? In that case, you don't have a choice. Yeah. Um, um, how can someone who had a bad or hurtful upbringing do the mitzvah on the parents? It's hard. It's very hard. How can they want to be a good parent themselves? Because a person will not want to do the same thing the parents did to them, to their own kids. Right? Now, we sometimes do that. We sometimes take the negative things and it's part of us, so we do that to our kids also. It gets passed down sometimes. Right? But you have to work hard, not that way. I would say start reading parenting books. Yeah, start reading parenting books what the right thing to do is in right situation. It doesn't even knowing the right thing to do in certain situations is very hard to do. It's not so easy to do. Yeah. There are many people who didn't have good examples as parents. Their parents were not good examples. So you have to learn from other people. Yeah. You have to learn from people who did it right. You have to see how they did it. Right? The person who lives in the community, I got to see this, straight away when, I was first married, got invited to, didn't have, too many kids, so got invited to a lot of different different people's houses for Shabbos, for festivals, different things. I saw, how they interacted, with their kids. Yeah, I saw that. That was a lesson. That was a live lesson. Now again, seeing it, doing it for yourself are two different things, but you have role models, right? So even the parents weren't the role models. You have other role models, right? But again, a lot of good books in child education and how to do it. But yeah, that is a problem. It is a serious problem that if a person, if the parents didn't have a good relationship or they weren't necessarily good parents because they didn't know what they're doing, that can have a serious effect on a child for sure, absolutely for sure. But you have to have other role models, and see how they do things and learn from them and forget about what your parents did. It's not so easy, right? It's not so easy, but that's what you have to do. Someone has that they're hopelessly hateful, run away. Yeah, what you have to do. That 100% is what you have to do. Yeah, it's painful, but guess what? I don't have to bang my head against the wall to a police to know it's bad. If you know it's bad, you run, right? 100%. 100%. I'm not saying it has to be that way, but sometimes it is. Someone asks, is it wise to loan a property to a sibling with whom you have a strained relationship without an agreement with terms and conditions? No. If you have a strained relationship and you have a property you want to rent out and you got to do it with them, put it all in writing. You can't trust them. If it's strained, they go against your back and do anything. Yeah, put it all in writing. Right? Every last thing you put in writing so you don't get messed up through the deal. Yeah, even if you have a good relationship, I would tell you that. Even if you have a good relationship, it doesn't have to be strained. Even if you have a good relationship, people do funny things with money when it comes to money. Very, very funny things when it comes to money. You can have a great relationship. Yeah. But get it in writing. Definitely get every last thing in writing. Whether you have a good relationship or not. Somebody asked, bad parents are great examples of how not to behave. Right. But if that's what a person sees, and that's what the person was asking, if that's what a person sees, how do you know the right way to treat a spouse, a child? If they themselves didn't, they're supposed to be your role models. For better or for worse, parents are supposed to be the role models for the children. Yeah, so it's not easy. Because a lot of that we take in. Right? And we say, I'll never do that. I'll never do what my parents did. You end up doing similar things sometimes. Not all the time. Right? But you do it sometimes. Because that's what you know. Yeah, again, it doesn't mean it's right by any stretch. But you need role models. Right? I would say you need role models and you need to read parenting books. Right? That'll help that. To get the right frame of mind what to do. Again, knowing what to do and doing it are two different things. But that would be a good start. All right, a lot of good questions here. I'm going to stop here. This is every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone that has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Koppel, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism. on Facebook, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, Ethics of Our Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIM, COFFMAN @gmail.com. Whatever good.